The play on the field, the court, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and vendors who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go Behind the Game with Patrick Klinger and Dave Bowden.
Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by KLN Family Brands, makers of delicious Wiley Wallaby licorice and Sweet Chaos popcorn, and Nutrisource pet foods. I haven't tried Nutrisource, but I'm sure it's delicious. I'm Patrick Klinger, alongside me Dave Bowden. He's freshly back from the Papal Conclave where he was cheering on the Cardinals, or maybe it was St. Louis.
I am a Cardinals fan.
Anyway,
yeah,
go Cardinals.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick.
You know, Dave, we're going in a little bit of a different direction today. You know, typically we have notable sports figures on the show. Today we've got a gentleman who's a longtime friend of mine and someone I genuinely consider to be a hero, Christy Sauro.
Christy, welcome to the show today.
My pleasure to be here.
So let me tell our audience today, Christy has written 2 books. His books tell the true life story of a group of Marine recruits sworn in before a Minnesota Twins game in 1967, a really interesting story. Christy's had an amazing career in the military as well, awarded a National Defense Service Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, 5-star Vietnam Campaign Medal, Presidential Unit Citation, Combat Action Ribbon, among meritorious unit commendation, among other things. So thank you for that service, and again, we appreciate all you've done. The Twins Platoon, first book, was a winner of the prestigious Stars and Flags Book Awards competition. The legacy of the Twins Platoon is coming soon. He'll tell us about it. And Christy, following your service, had an active career in the insurance industry that spanned over 41 years. So we're really happy to have you here today. Patrick, you want to kind of kick it off?
Yeah. Well, Chris, it is a privilege to have you here. You and I have known each other for about 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
I know the story. It's an incredible one.
Yeah.
As Dave mentioned, you were sworn in with a number of other Marine recruits, I think about 150.
Okay.
Prior to a Twins game in 1967.
Yep.
And that group became known as the Twins Platoon.
Yep.
Right? By the 4th inning, you were on a bus on your way to basic training and then on to Vietnam. What do you remember about that day when you were sworn in at Metropolitan Stadium?
Okay. Before I answer that, I'd just like to clear the air on one thing. I wouldn't be here, and there wouldn't be any book about the Twins Platoon if it wasn't for all the people that were willing to share their deeply personal stories. And some of them are very deeply personal, and it took a lot of courage for them to tell it and share it. And they did it because it would benefit other people. And so anyhow, I just want to make that clear. But to answer your question, that was back in June of 1967. And most of us were freshly out of high school, just graduated. And to be on a ball field, you know, with the Minnesota Twins in front of all the fans and having them cheer and applaud us was something I'd never experienced in my life. And it was very moving, very touching. It was a mixture of emotions. We had apprehension, like, could you make it through boot camp? Marine boot camp was said to be the hardest, so you had to worry, could you even make it through boot camp? And then if you did, you worried about what's Vietnam going to be like if you have to go there. And then with all the fans cheering, like I said, it was just an incredible feeling. And then you felt really an obligation to your country because these were your fellow countrymen cheering you off the ball field. So it was quite a memorable experience that I'll never forget. So,
as Patrick mentioned, we focus in this show often in the sports world and interesting, but light, right?
Yeah.
This story really has a sports connection with the Twins Platoon, but at its heart, it's the deeply serious story
Yeah.
of Vietnam
Yeah.
and young children, kids really going to Vietnam to fight for our country. Tell us a little bit, and we could spend a show on this, I'm sure, but tell us just a little bit about your experience. So once you left and
Sure.
were deployed, what was your
Okay.
experience in Vietnam?
Well, just real briefly, my story pales in comparison to the other members that I write about. And when people read it in the book, I mean, I'm in there in just a few little parts, and they'll read about some incredible young men and Marines and their families. But just briefly, I got overseas and I was attached to a helicopter squadron, HMM 362, and I was what they would call an embarkation assistant. And again, I guess the best way to sum it up, if people read the book, I did what all of us did. I gave it 100%. I gave it everything I had, and no regrets about that. But again, when they read the book, they'll see that my story pales compared to what these other guys went through. So,
Christy, the Twins Platoon, it was dispersed around all parts of Vietnam, and they experienced some of the fiercest combat of the war, including everything where Khe Sanh and Hue City. Not all members of the Twins Platoon came back at all. I mean, some, of course, came back injured. How did you approach really the sensitive task of reaching out to platoon members to get their stories?
sure. Well, one of the things when I came back is that I had way more questions than I had answers. All I knew was my own personal experience, which is like an extremely limited view of the war. I had no idea what the bigger picture was, what happened to anybody else. And when I reached out to the other members of the Twins Platoon and their families to start interviewing them for their first book, I found out they were all in the same boat. And so we had a kind of a common bond. I think we all wanted to know what was the bigger picture. What happened? The families wanted to know what happened to their loved ones over there. They had no clue. The Marines I served with, all they knew was just a little snapshot of their own experience, and they wondered what happened to the other ones. So, and they had questions, and like one of the questions I had an interview sheet that I took on the first book, and one of the questions was, how often did they think about Vietnam? Because I used to think about it almost every day, and this is like, 10, 20 years later, and I wondered, am I some kind of oddball? I have some kind of problem here, and I was shocked to find out every one of them, except for Carter and Circle, I was the first person they had talked to about their Vietnam experiences. And this was in 1990 when I started, and they had gotten out of service in the late 60s and 70s. So it was that kind of a thing. So I think we had that common bond. They knew I was out putting the information together that would give us the answers we were looking for. Some of the parents, like the family of Skip Schmidt was typical. They don't know what happened to him over there because he came back, he never talked about it. He's passed away. And they're just filled with questions. So I don't know if that helps you. So it was sensitive, but it wasn't hard because we shared a common goal. We were looking for answers. So
when you went to Vietnam, and as the same with the platoon, you were young men. Again, I'd say kids, but young men, but also obviously people had to grow up fast. And people changed during that time to various degrees. How did you see, like for yourself, some of the most significant transformations of people you knew going in and coming out, or even your own experience? How do you feel you were changed when you came home?
There's a lot of ways to answer that. I have one news story in the new book that kind of highlights that a little bit. I don't know if this will answer your question, but this fellow's name is Charlie White. And I have pictures of him before Vietnam. And in every picture, he's smiling. He has this great smile. And in the pictures he sent back from Vietnam, there was no smile. And he looked like an old man. So anyhow, it was a changing
Yeah,
experience.
understood.
So, okay.
The Vietnam War
Yeah.
was very controversial
Yeah.
back in the 1960s and the early 70s. Really divided the
Yeah.
nation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
If you go back to when you were inducted on that
Yeah.
June day in 1967,
Yeah.
what was the reception like from the crowd that day?
Yeah.
And then spring forward to when
Yeah.
you 1970 and you
Yeah.
got out of the Marines,
Yeah.
you came home, and a lot of
Yeah.
military members weren't met with a very warm reception.
Yep. I think that's common knowledge, and what I like about the book, if people read it, is they're going to read specific examples of what everybody went through. And for most of them, and I'll give a few examples, it was not good, but like everything else, there was a few exceptions, and those stories are in there too. So there were some that got treated very well, but I would say the vast majority didn't. You know, they got stories in there where one guy coming back, which lives nearby, Russ Edmondson, he got spit on. Larry Jones came back, story in there where he went to a bar on University Avenue and he got physically assaulted. Just quick, when I was in LA, when I got back from Vietnam and we were stationed at El Toro Marine Base, and that's near Los Angeles. When I first got back, it was required that you wear your military uniforms off base. And within 12 months, they had changed to where it was okay to grow your hair long beyond regulation, so you wouldn't look like you were military, and you could go off base without wearing your uniform. You could wear civilian clothes. And they did that so that you wouldn't be easily recognized as being in the military. And I'll give one quick example of, this was when we were still in our uniforms. Me and another guy, Taylor, we went out on Liberty on Sunday, and we went to Los Angeles, and we went into a pool hall to play pool. And when we walked in, everybody stopped talking, and there were more young people than old, but everybody turned and looked at us. Nobody said anything. The looks were extremely hostile. It was like everybody was willing us to leave. And we started playing pool, and it was creepy. I've never had anything like that before. And then the waitress came over and said, I think it would be best if you two left, just for your own safety. And I think back then we weren't worried about our own safety, because I think we could have taken care of ourselves. But that feeling of, like, I think you can all be not liked, but to be disliked is totally different. And it's a feeling I'll never get over. It's a horrible feeling. And also remember from that experience, this was a time of a lot of racial discrimination. And strange as this may sound, I thought, this must be what a black person feels like when they go into a bar.
Yeah,
And yeah.
no reason other than
Yeah. So those are two quick stories, but there's many of them, and most of them aren't good. And the end result of that, real quick, was all of us, when we got discharged, it wasn't very long. We just wanted to put the war behind us. We didn't want to talk about Vietnam. We didn't want to see movies on Vietnam. We didn't want to read about Vietnam. We didn't want to talk about Vietnam. We didn't want to join any military organizations.
Right.
We just went into isolation, basically, and didn't talk about it. And again, back in the 90s, that's why I think when I went out on the first interview, that's why they said I was the first person they had talked to.
Yeah,
So,
it's not a proud chapter in our history, really, how that happened.
Yeah.
I like to think a lot's changed since then, and veterans are celebrated regardless of the broader picture of the conflicts. But
Right.
Does that cause you, if I can just quickly follow up?
Sure.
You see how veterans
Yeah.
and active duty members are treated today.
Yeah.
They are treated
Yeah.
as heroes,
Yeah.
celebrated.
Yeah.
Is there any envy
No.
over that because you were treated so differently?
No. One of the things I like about the new book is that the first book, the timeline ended in 2006. This goes to the present. So it's actually a look at American history, and it follows these young people, almost from the cradle to the grave, because many of them have died of old men. And in the book, because it goes all the way to the present, you see that transformation where you see how our country went from a divided country to, again, a reunited country, and how things did change over how the military was viewed. And a quick story, and this one is in the book, is that our first book signing after the book came out in 2006, Larry Buskey was running late to get there, and his wife said, "Hurry up, Larry, you're going to be late." And he said, "No, why? Nobody's going to come to the book signing." And when he got there, there was over 100 people there, and he was shocked. And it started changing. So, to make a long story short, no, we weren't envious. We were thrilled to death to see that our country had changed their view of the military and how to treat them. So that was a big plus, a huge plus. Something brings us great happiness.
Good.
So
you mentioned, and understandably, really when you got out and others, you just wanted to put it behind you. Some because of the treatment, probably some just from the experience.
Yeah.
So you spent over a decade after leaving the Marines before you decided to write this book.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst, or what was happening at that time that made you compelled to take on such a big effort?
Kind of interesting. The idea came to me about in 1986 that I should write a book about the Twins Platoon. And when I thought about it, remember I said I only knew my own little experience, let alone the bigger picture. And it was like, how in the world am I ever going to write about 150 guys, about the Vietnam War? It's like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. This could take years or a lifetime to do it. So I dismissed the idea. But the idea wouldn't go away. It just wouldn't go away. It kept getting stronger and stronger until it evolved into what I would say is a calling. And a calling, I think, is something that everybody will have, and when they have it, they'll know they'll have it. And it's not uncommon. It's like if you talk to a teacher or a nurse or a musician, you talk to a lot of people who'll say, that was my calling. It was kind of that thing. It was like just something. This is my purpose in life. I think we all have one, and I think this was my purpose, to write about the Twins Platoon, and it's part of our history. So,
your research involved tracking down and interviewing many members of the Twins Platoon, right? As many as you could find. Tell us, Christy, about some of the challenges and the rewards of that process that spanned over a dozen years.
Yeah. Well, the challenges changed. At first, we didn't have the technology that we have today. Computers were just starting to be used. There was no cell phones, no emails, texting, none of that. So I would have to, it was very difficult to track down people. I had to travel, sometimes all the way across the country. Have to go to libraries and go through microfiche films to look for information on old newspapers. It was very cumbersome, but, and maybe this goes back to it being a calling. I never lost interest, and I always ended up with everything I needed. And even in the second book, it's been the same thing. It's easier with new technology, but still, some of the things, tracking down people, getting what I need, it was always, I always ended up with it. So, and there was another part to your question.
Well, you know, you spoke of the challenges of trying to track down the platoon members, right? And finding where they are and reaching out to them. How about some of the rewards of connecting with them?
Rewards were tremendous because the answers brought healing. You could see people in their healing. It's the most rewarding. I've never had anything as rewarding as that, when you see somebody that's hurting, suffering because they don't know the answers to certain questions, and then to have those answers. It's tremendously rewarding. It's probably one of the most rewarding things a person can have.
Did you find some members of the platoon that did not want to speak?
Only one way early on. In fact, he probably lives around here. I think he was a principal. I think his name was Gary Priest. He was the only one. And he said, why? I just asked him, well, why is that? And he said he had just gone through some kind of a big interview where he had just gone through all his war experiences with somebody or something. And he said, I just don't really want to sit down and do that again. And I said, okay, and I understood. And then I take that back. One other fellow, I won't mention his name, he had such a rough time in boot camp, he did not want to be talked about because I think he feared, he didn't want people to know what happened to him. And so I respected that. So that was it. Other than that, everybody else was willing. And many, I should say, there were some that were very reluctant because the information was so personal about things that went on behind closed doors. And I think they had a struggle with that. And I didn't pressure anybody. I mean, I let them have time to sort it out, to decide if they're really comfortable with going with it. And in the end, they all did. And I think a lot of it was because they knew it could benefit other people.
So, you know, I know that this is in the book. There's
Sure.
some of these stories or things, but
Yeah.
if you look at sort of the results of talking to everybody
Yeah.
that you talked to for that first book, were there any kind of recurring themes or insights that seem to be fairly consistent across this group that you took from the interview process?
There's a lot, and there are a wide variety of different things, totally unrelated. For one example, as I went through an interview, I was shocked at how many of the guys had been wounded multiple times, and sometimes severely, and returned to combat and just performed spectacularly. So that shocked me, that how many of them had been through some extreme fighting multiple times. So that was the other reoccurring themes were the rejection. Another one was guilt and shame. A lot of us, because of the reception we got, it left us with questioning our own morality. And so there was a lot of, for some of us, I think many of us, shame and guilt. And fortunately, over time, and with the help of countrymen and people like the Twins organization and Patrick Klinger, they did things that started to turn that around. So,
Chris, have you been able to stay connected with some of the platoon members now? After you reached out to them back in the 1990s, and of course your second book is coming out.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were able to develop some friendships and some connections that have been long lasting?
Yep, absolutely. A lot of them, I've sad to say, have passed away, and some of them have moved and I've lost connection with them, so I have to reconnect, but still I hear from a lot of them. In fact, on this Monday, Jerry Baltes flew in from California to see his son, and I got a call from him. We got together and had a fabulous 3 hours reconnecting and visiting. And the family of Wallace Skip Schmidt, very close to them. They're like family. So yeah, some more so than others. Some, you know, we're talking 150 people, and probably about a third of them, you know, I have to find out now if some are even still alive, because I don't know, you know. Something else I might mention too that was a reoccurring theme was the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis. I don't know if you've ever heard that. But all the Marines, all the ones in the books, totally isolated, off by themselves. And when it came time to do something for their fellow Marine, they all stepped up, came out of the woodwork. So that was very rewarding to see that, in spite of everything, they stayed true to that motto.
So many members of the Twins Platoon had a reunion at the Metrodome.
Yes.
Nearly 40 years after being sworn into the Marines and being in Vietnam. What was it like to be back together with at least some of that group at the Twins game? It
was amazing. And I think what was more amazing, and it was fun us getting together and visit, and Patrick Klinger was part of that. I think he was instrumental in having that happen. And I remember when they were all out on the ball field getting cheered, it brought tears to some of their eyes, because that was the first time they had really, I think, experienced that welcome home, and that we don't just like you, we honor your service. That was the first time many of them had ever experienced that, and it literally brought the tears to their eyes. So that was an incredible experience. And for many, that was the start of their healing and turning things around. And you talked about reoccurring themes over the years. And again, it's thanks to things that the Twins organization did, and Patrick Klinger did. There's all kinds of things we could talk about, flag raisers, things like that. And I hope we get time to talk about that a little bit. But yeah, so it's quite an experience, a lifetime experience. In fact, I'll take it one step farther. Some of them, when I said they had passed away, and when I went to their funerals, on display all over, most of it was their Marine Corps experience and the things about book signings and the Twins game and all that. And these were fellows that didn't even want to talk about Vietnam when we first started back in 1990. And because of the way things changed and the reception changed and reunions and things that the organization did, went to where that was probably their biggest accomplishment, one of their proudest moments, and it's displayed at their funeral all over the place. So
it's very cool. If I might just jump in with one other thing, that it just occurs to me that based on what you're talking about, and Patrick, from the sports marketing side of the Twins, you would know this in others, but we talked about our focus on sports is kind of the light-hearted side of life, and this is serious, but it occurs to me that sports in general has served a great role in bringing honor to the veterans. It's a public forum. You're on TV. You're in the stadiums, and pretty much every game you go to now has some veteran component of their service. I mean, you should feel good from a sports background side, and just to see that sports for a greater good a little bit.
Absolutely. It provides a really a terrific platform to celebrate our heroes and those who sacrifice so much, go overseas, move away from family, put themselves in harm's way. Too often we apply the word hero to sports figures and not heroes. They're athletes, but...
I should say one thing, and that's real quick again on the Twins organization. People like Patrick Klinger. I don't have time to talk about it all today, but it's in the book. There's some incredible stories in the book of what people have done to change the lives of the Twins Platoon. And believe me, some of those stories will move you to, I think will make you misty, will bring almost tears to your eyes.
Sure.
And maybe sometime we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit more. So.
Love that.
Very quickly, you've got a second book coming out, The Legacy of the Twins Platoon. What prompted you to want to take on another project like that 20 years after the first book came out?
It was the same thing. I didn't want to do it. It was the last thing on my mind, and then a calling. It was another calling that this is something you need to do. And it was like, I think, seeing them pass away and realizing all these stories I had heard over the years about the guys that I didn't write about, I realized their stories needed to be told too. And they were different than the ones in the book. I thought, this will give people a really incredible view of the Vietnam War and how it's affected people, families, and our country. And now it's like a complete snapshot of history from the cradle to the grave. And again, it was a calling, so it was just like something I needed to do, and I needed to do it now because time is running out for us. I mean, we're at that age, unfortunately. So, and the last chapter in the book is called The Final Chapter, appropriately, because not too many years will be gone. So,
well, Christy, I'd have to say you're a great American hero, not just for serving, but even more so for what you've done afterwards for your fellow soldiers and for awareness. And we're really honored to have you here as our guest
privilege.
today.
And again, we have to thank the people that were willing to share their stories, or I wouldn't be here. So.
Chris Sauro, thank you so very much for being
Thank you.
Behind the Game. Dave, thank you. Always great to see you, my friend.
Okay.
The Twins Platoon, and coming soon, The Legacy of the Twins Platoon. You'll be able to find it at local bookstores and online, I'm sure.
Okay.
Thank you all for watching Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger. See you again next month.